Luke chapter 23, we'll begin this morning with verse 5. Luke chapter 23 and verse 5. We spent our last week discussing, they brought Jesus from Caiaphas to Pilate. We finished, apparently, we finished what I would describe as the Jewish portion of these trials. We remember when Jesus was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, he was taken first to the house of Annas. Annas being the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest. He had got that by maybe not legal means Caiaphas had, but Annas was the real high priest. They went there first with him, talked with him a little bit, but they took him to Caiaphas. Some discussion there. Caiaphas called the chief priest and the elders. He called the Sanhedrin council together. And they had a discussion. So we've had three different discussions with Jesus among the Jewish people there. Keep in mind that all this is happening from, I would guess 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning until daylight. Remember, Peter has denied Jesus 3 times, and then the rooster begins to crow after the third denial, signaling that daylight's coming. John chapter 18 tells us when they got to Pilate's house, it was early in the morning. And so these folks are in sort of a bind. Why do they need to get this done that day? Why do they need to get this trial done? They're in a big rush. And we're gonna see this as a trial that's going to result in mob rule, a lynching, if you would. All the judges are going to say he's innocent. There's nothing wrong with him. But the mob's going to say, no, that ain't what we want. Well, what's the big rush?
Big day of Pentecost coming up. Passover's coming up.
Okay. This is on Friday, huh? What we would call Friday. Passover was the night before. Remember, Passover began on 6 o'clock or at sundown, say Thursday, sundown, and it would run to sun up, daylight, the next morning. They had to eat the Passover feast, of course, that night. Couldn't eat it the next day or in the daylight. The Passover feast was eaten at night. We're now, Passover feast has concluded. Let's say it's 6:30 in the morning. Sun's coming up. The next day that's coming, this is Friday for us, the Sabbath day's coming. Sabbath day is going to start at 6 o'clock on Friday evening, and it's going to run till 6 o'clock the next morning. And so they're going to have to get this trial done. They're going to have to get him crucified and buried because they can't do that on the Sabbath day. All this has got to get done right quick, James, because, they've got him and let's just dispose of him. Don't want to hold him. What else is going on at this time? Passover was followed by 7 days of unleavened bread. This is still a Jewish feast. And so they can't be bothered with all this crucified and getting him off the cross and getting him buried. You've got to get this done today, between daylight and sundown this very evening. So that's the position that these folks are in. But we're going to Pilate. Pilate, of course, is going to send him to Herod. Herod's going to talk to him. He's going to send him back to Pilate. And so that's going to be the Roman side of this trial. But of course, as I've said, the judgment, the result of it, is going to be done by this mob of people who are determined to crucify this man Jesus. So let's look at Luke chapter 23. Let's read verses 5, 6, and 7 to begin with our discussion this morning. And they, the Jewish multitude, were the more fierce, saying, he's stirring up the people, Pilate. He's teaching throughout all Jewry, beginning from Galilee to this place. When Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked whether the man were a Galilean. And as soon as he knew that he belonged unto Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who himself also was at Jerusalem at this time. Verse 4 concluded by saying, Pilate said, I don't find no fault in this man. I don't see why you brought him before me. I don't see anything wrong with him. Remember, they'd accused him in verse 2 of stirring up the people, of refusing to pay taxes, and claiming to be a king himself. Some things that they thought Pilate would be interested in. He's stirring up the people, Pilate. He's trying to overthrow you. He's trying to overthrow King Herod. If he could overthrow Caesar also, he would do that too. He don't pay taxes, and he's telling everybody not to pay taxes. And he thinks he's a king. Pilate, he'll probably have your job before you know it. He might even have Caesar's job. Pilate should have been interested in all those things, but Pilate said, I don't find no reason that he need to be put to death. He's probably looking at the man and thinking, this guy's not able to pay taxes. He probably don't have two nickels to rub together. He can't pay taxes, and to look at him, he's not a king. He might be a little bit off, but he's not a king. So, I don't find any reason to punish him, to put him to death. But verse 5, they were the more fierce, saying, Pilate, he's stirring up the people. The council, the Sanhedrin council, was even more angry. Pilate, he's stirring up the people. That was part of Pilate's job, as we said last week, was to keep the peace. That was a big part of his job. We're going to look at Barabbas here in a little bit. He's in jail because he was involved in an uprising and insurrection where somebody got killed. And apparently maybe Barabbas was the one who did the killing, but he was at least accused of that. But all that was a result of the uprising of the Jewish people against the Roman occupiers. And so Pilate's big job was there to keep the peace, keep everything under control. Caesar didn't want to hear about any uprising down there. Pilate, just go down there and do your job, keep the people under control, but make them happy, whatever we need to do. Mark 15 and verse 15, result of all these people hollering and raising sand about Pilate trying to release him, it said that Pilate was willing to content the people. Okay, if that's what you want, if that'll satisfy you, you can just take him and crucify him. Oh, we just want to content the people here. It doesn't matter if the man's guilty or not. But apparently here in verse 5, that this council thought that Pilate didn't take these things seriously. Pilate, he's stirring up the Jewish people. Notice there, they included this now to include the nation of Israel, the Jewish people. He's stirring up people, teaching throughout all Jewry, all the Jewish nation here. But Pilate, saw nothing against the Roman government, and he wasn't concerned about their Jewish beliefs and their Jewish customs and their Jewish religion. Pilate wasn't bothered, apparently, because he thought he was a king. And so notice these people seem now that they're going to lean heavily on Pilate. He's stirring up all the Jewish people. And he's teaching that in Jerusalem. They've added these things now to their accusations. But notice what they also added there. Sometimes when we talk too much. We talk too much. Less said is sometimes better. But notice that he's teaching throughout all Jewry, and he began this Pilate in Galilee, and he's brought it to this place. They're trying to press their point. Pilate, he started all this stuff in Galilee. He brought this stuff now to Jerusalem. He stirred up all the people everywhere. He started all this stuff up in Galilee. The implication is that he's trying to get all the Jews now to rise up against Caesar. That's what he's doing, Pilate. But again, he started in Jerusalem, and he ain't going to stop. He's brought it now down here to Jerusalem. That should have done it. Pilate, he's been doing this, and he's been doing this for a long time, and he's doing this everywhere. Now he's down here at your doorstep and our doorstep. But notice the problem here, verse 6. Anyone have any comment? Verse 6, when Pilate heard of Galilee, they told him, well, he started this in Galilee. When Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked whether the man were a Galilean. What difference does that make? What difference does that, We're going to pass the buck. Let's pass the buck. Pilate found no fault in him. These Jewish leaders, since he told them, I don't find any fault in him, they're more upset. They're fierce now. And I think Pilate recognized that even these people who they're so upset and angry, they could cause trouble for him. His job is to keep the peace. But now Pilate's heard that they mentioned Galilee. Galilee, okay. He started all this in Galilee. We're trying to keep the people calmed down. All of us Jewish people, Pilate, we're simply trying to help you keep the peace. That's what they're trying to help him. Do they care about Pilate?
No.
Nah. You care about Pilate? Well, let's try to get something done to this man Jesus. We can try to butter him up. Pilate, we're just trying to help you. Pilate has asked, is he a Galilean? He started this in Galilee. Well, you know, we know he grew up in Nazareth of Galilee. The first miracle that he did was in Cana of Galilee, where he turned the water into wine. He spent much time in Capernaum, which was located on the Sea of Galilee. He grew up in Nazareth. He was about 30 years old when he began his teaching ministry, and he left Nazareth, went to Capernaum, spent about 3 years in and out of Capernaum of Galilee. Yeah, he's a Galilean, all right. He's a Galilean.
It's everybody else's problem.
Exactly. You know, if Colt committed a crime over in Mississippi and he's come back home and he's been arrested here,
Send him back to Mississippi.
we got to send him back to Mississippi.
They don't want to fool with him.
You want food with him? We can probably get him off. Yeah, he's going to be sent back to where he committed the crime, huh? And that's what the light bulb has come on in Pilate's head here. He's a Galilean. You know, he's not in my jurisdiction. Notice verse 6 verse 7, as soon as he knew that he belonged under Herod's jurisdiction. Colt belongs to Mississippi's jurisdiction. This man Jesus, he's from Galilee. He belonged back in Galilee. Herod and Pilate, were they good friends?
No.
Notice verse 12 there, and we'll talk about this when we get down to verse 12. The same day, they're going to send Jesus back and forth between Pilate and Herod. The same day, Pilate and Herod were made friends together, for before they were enmity between themselves. They weren't friends at all. You would think that two Roman rulers, their territory was right adjacent to one another. You'd think that they would be at least friendly, you know, to work together to keep the peace down there. You know, Pilate had Judea. You know, he had the two southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin, and Herod had the 10 northern tribes up in Samaria and Galilee. He had the 10 northern tribes there. And Pilate probably, he didn't care for Herod. Pilate probably wasn't interested in these Jews in Galilee either. That's not his job. You know, if you weren't from Judea, their notion was you're not anybody. You know, all the wise people, all the wealthy people, all the knowledgeable people, all the people with an education, they're from Judea and Galilee. Nobody from Nazareth or from Galilee is anybody. Yeah, he's a Galilean, and he probably loves Herod too, Pilate. You know, he probably loves Herod. He's probably proud of being a Galilean. They probably threw all that in there too to make Herod even more against the man. But he's decided, now notice verse 7, as soon as he knew that he belonged unto Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who himself was also at Jerusalem at that time. Well, let's just send him to Herod. Of course, that wasn't the Jews' plan. We're on a timetable here. The day's getting long. We're going to crucify him today and get him dead and get him buried. We got to do it before sundown, James, because we're talking about literally today. If we're doing that today, we got to get it done before sundown. We got to get him tried, convicted, killed, and buried, and out of the way. But as Pilate realized, and it's their fault, they shouldn't have mentioned Galilee. But sometimes we say too much, and now we got to deal with this. As soon as he knew that, this was a good chance for him to get rid of this problem, this headache, this responsibility. Let's just pass the buck to old Herod. I don't like him anyway. He probably needs something to do, Harold, anyway. Well, let's give old Herod this problem. Just sort of poke Herod in the eye. We don't get along anyway. Well, here's you a nice present, Herod. Notice Herod happened to be in Jerusalem at that time. You would think that these two Roman rulers, they're all in the same town, city. They would have visited one another, got their heads together and talked about their common problems or whatever it was. Well, no, they didn't have anything to do with each other. They didn't like each other. Pilate wanted to get rid of this problem. But verse 4, I don't find any fault in him. Verse 16, I'll just release him and chastise him. Matthew 27 and verse 19, Pilate's wife sent him a message warning him, don't don't have anything to do with that man Jesus because I've had a dream about him. And it ain't good, so you get away from that man Jesus. Matthew 27 and verse 24, Pilate washed his hands of the whole situation, you know. He wanted away from it. And apparently this was the way to absolve himself of any responsibility. Let's just send him to King Herod. And let old King Herod, he can take care of this. Notice verse 8. Did Herod want him? Herod wanted him? Notice verse 8. And when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he was desirous to see him of a long season, because he had heard many things of him. And notice this, he hoped to have seen some miracle done by him. Herod was glad to see Jesus. His old enemy Pilate has sent him somebody that he's glad to see, been wanting to see him for a long time.
I think the attitude there, Ricky, was, I want to see this circus show.
Yes.
He said, I want to see this spectacle. Like, come entertain me.
Entertainment.
That's the motive he had behind
Yes.
it.
Yeah. Entertainment. He's the king.
He's some kind of magician, so bring him in here and let me
Well, sure.
let me perform for me.
Yeah. Absolutely. That was the purpose. He's the king. You know, to me, it was sort of like a kid. You know, he entertained, but it wasn't that.
Herod didn't care about Christ.
No.
He said, I want to see this sideshow.
Yeah. Bring him. Yeah. Hey, here he comes. I've been hearing about him. I want to see him a long time. Notice, go back to Luke chapter 9. You remember, Herod was cruel and he was revengeful and he was selfish. Remember what he did to John the Baptist? This is the same Herod.
Yeah.
He had his head chopped off because he had married his brother Philip's wife. Herod had married his brother Philip's wife. He had taken his brother's wife away from him, and he's married her. John the Baptist had told him you can't do that, and so he got his head chopped off. John the Baptist did by Herod. Now notice Luke chapter 9, beginning in verse 7. Now Herod the Tetrarch heard all that was done by Jesus, and he was perplexed, because some people are saying that, this is John the Baptist that's risen from the dead. Somebody, a guy out there performing miracles, he's teaching and preaching and performing miracles, and people are thinking, well, Herod, you chopped off John the Baptist's head. I think that's John the Baptist. He's risen from the dead. That's who it is, Herod. Did John the Baptist ever perform a miracle? No. He never performed a miracle. But notice, verse 8. Some other people said, well, here, that's Elijah. He's appeared, and of others that one of the old prophets has risen from the dead. Verse 9, and Herod said, John I've beheaded, but who is this of whom I hear such things? And he desired to see him. He wanted to see this guy. At one time, I forgot which reading it was, which gospel it was. He put a little fear into Herod. This is John the Baptist risen from the dead. Of course, I guess he dismissed that. He wants to see this guy. He's desired to see this guy. So as we go back to Luke chapter 23, he's heard a lot about this guy, wanted to see Jesus perform a miracle. Now here he is. He wants to be entertained, as Andy said, by this man Jesus. When Herod saw him, he was thrilled to death. Here he's walking in here with all a bunch of other people. He wasn't interested in learning anything about what Jesus was teaching. He's not interested in that. No interest in the man Jesus, other than let's see one of them miracles, Jesus. He's the king. Maybe he was entitled to see a miracle. Is he going to see a miracle? No, he's not going to see a miracle. Notice, anyone have any comment? I'm doing all the talking here. Verse 9. Herod questioned Jesus in many words, but Jesus answered not one. He didn't say one word. He had no intention of entertaining Herod. Questioned Jesus with many words, with many questions. He's questioning this man Jesus. We, of course, don't know what those questions were. It was probably about some of them miracles, though. Jesus, I heard this, and I heard this, and, tell me about this, and why don't you do this? And Jesus saw Herod that he's not interested in any spiritual matters. He just wants to hear or to see a miracle. Heard many things about this man in Galilee. Jesus has spent 3 years. He grew up in Nazareth. He's about 30 years old when he began his ministry. He spent 3 years teaching and preaching and performing miracles there in Galilee. Couldn't Herod have got up and went and watched a miracle? You know, why not? He don't go where Jesus is performing a miracle. Of course, if the king shows up, well, that might cause a stir in the people. But Herod has had the opportunity for 3 years to see a miracle. He's just curious. He wants to see a miracle. He's not interested in this man, Jesus. Maybe he's asking him about some of those miracles. Notice Luke chapter 4. Notice some of the miracles that Jesus performed. We can't, of course, look at all of them. John chapter 4.
That's where he heard the little boy.
Sir?
That's where he healed the little man's little boy.
Yeah, he cured somebody there in the synagogue. Let me see, what verse was I at now? Here we are. Here. Luke chapter 4, verse 31. He came down to Capernaum, a city of Galilee, and taught on the Sabbath days. In verse 33, in the synagogue there was a man which had a spirit of an unclean devil. He cast that devil out of this man. Notice verse 36 and 37. And they were all amazed and spake among themselves and saying, what a word is this? For with authority and power he commands even the unclean spirits, and they come out of him. And the fame of Jesus went into every place of the country round about. Herod probably heard about that. He's there in Galilee. He's in Capernaum. He performed a miracle. John chapter 2, that records the wedding feast at Cana, where he turned the water into wine. Maybe Herod's sitting there with a pot of water beside him when Jesus comes in, and he's asking him, can you turn my water into wine? I've got some water right here. Just turn my water into wine. Let's go.
That chapter, I was trying to say that he healed the man's little boy. That was the second miracle he did.
Yes. But notice Luke chapter 7, another miracle, and then we'll go back to Luke chapter 23. Luke chapter 7, verse 1. Now, when he had ended all his sayings to the audience, the people, he went back to Capernaum. This is in Galilee. He's still in Galilee. And notice verse 11. Luke chapter 7, verse 11. It came to pass the day after that he went into a city called Nain, N-A-I-N. He's still in Galilee. What's going to happen in Nain? He's going to raise the young man from the dead, huh? He noticed that there's this funeral coming out of the city, verse 12. And when the Lord saw her, told the mama, he had compassion on her and told her not to cry. And he came and he touched the bier, verse 14. And they that bare him stood still, and he said, young man, I say unto thee, arise. And he that was dead sat up and began to speak, and he delivered him to his mother. Don't you think that Herod heard about he raised a dead person back to life? I'm sure he heard that one too. And now he's wanting to hear or to see some of these miracles. I know, why didn't he just go where Jesus was? But of course, this is better. Herod had heard of all these, and he probably had heard of more. And so now Jesus is there in his presence. He wants to be entertained with the miracle. But he's not going to see a miracle. The poorest person that came to Jesus with a need, whether he needed to be healed, whether he had some other problem of another kind, the poorest person that came to Jesus with faith that Jesus could do this, Jesus always accommodated them. But now we have him standing before this proud king who wants to just see a miracle, and he ain't going to see one. Ain't not going to do that. Herod could have gone and seen some miracles in Galilee, but he didn't bother with that. But now he wants to see some, and he ain't going to see one. Jesus doesn't say a word to all these questions. Now, notice as we go back to Luke chapter 23, verse 10. Jesus ain't saying nothing. Notice who's going to speak up. We still got our mob. Verse 10, and the chief priests and the scribes stood and vehemently accused Jesus. They're accusing Jesus to Herod now. They'd already accused Jesus to Pilate. Jesus is saying nothing. He haven't said a word. He hadn't performed a miracle. Apparently this mob here sees that Herod has some interest in the guy. Herod's talking to him, asking him questions, probably about some of these miracles, asking about, why don't you perform a miracle for me? Herod's showing some interest in him. Jesus is not saying anything. All Jesus had to do was perform a miracle. Perform a miracle, and Herod probably let him go. Just perform a miracle or two. And Herod would tell him, well, go on and come back and see me sometime. All we got to do. Just perform a miracle. But Jesus is not saying anything. So the mob here, they're going to fill the void. There's a heavy silence. What do you call it? There's silence here. Nobody's saying, Jesus is not saying anything. So they're going to fill in the void. They'll say something. They're going to vehemently accuse Jesus, eagerly and with passion. The truth don't matter. Have you ever heard somebody get so worked up that they get real loud and they get way off? They're trying to press their point, trying to make sure that you hear them and you're going to recognize that they're right. That's what this crowd is doing. The truth that doesn't matter. Being vehement most times shows that whatever that you're saying, if you're telling it loud and you're telling it long and you're embellishing it, you're adding to that, it's probably not the truth. That's how a mob does. It needs to be said loudly or with much passion. Well, it's probably not the truth. Sometimes moderation is much better. It's a much better tactic than screaming and hollering and jumping up and down. The accusations would be viewed better and would not be questioned, if you're jumping up and down hollering. But I'm not sure that those accusations had any effect on Herod. He was probably angry now that Jesus wouldn't say anything, and angry that now this man Jesus is not going to perform a miracle. And so we at least need to do something to him before we let him go. Notice verse 11. And Herod with his men of war set Jesus at naught. They mocked him, they arrayed him in a gorgeous robe, and they sent him again to Pilate. Going back to Pilate now, like a yo-yo, up and down, back and forth. Herod and his men began to mock and to ridicule this man Jesus. He won't speak. He won't perform a miracle. He won't do nothing. He's just standing there. Herod wanted to see a miracle. Jesus won't say nothing. He won't do anything. And so these Pharisees have told Herod Jesus thinks he's a king. Herod's looking at him like probably Pilate did with a whole lot of doubt. This guy don't look like no king to me, James. He's ragged. He's had a hard night. He's been beat up there at Caiaphas' house. They beat him. They slapped him. They spit in his face. His clothes are torn, it looks pretty ragged. He don't look like no king to me, to Pilate, and he don't look like no king to Herod either. So Herod's looking at him, he thinks he's a king. Well, Herod sort of doubts that too. He might be a little bit off. He thinks he's a king. But since Jesus won't do anything, we can have a little fun with him while he's here. He's a little bit off. And since he thinks he's a king, let's just mock him. Treat him with ridicule, treat him with derision. If he thinks he's a king, that's my robe hanging over there. Put that robe on him. Let's see how he looks in the robe. Maybe that'll make him look like a king now. Put the robe on him. Pilate and his people, they're going to put a purple robe on him, and they're going to put on a crown of thorns. They're going to see how he looks as a king when he gets back to Pilate. Herod and his folks, they rough him up a little. They put this royal robe on him, but he still don't look or act like a king that they've ever seen. So let's just send him back to Pilate. Send him back to Pilate. Why did Pilate send him over here to me? We had a little fun with him. He's a little bit off. Just take him back. We're still in Jerusalem, we're still in Jerusalem. Just take him back wherever Pilate is over there and give him back to him. Anyone have any comment? Notice verse 12 now. We talked about that, mentioned that a little while ago. That same day, Pilate and Herod were made friends together, or before they were at enmity between themselves. As a result of what has happened here with this man Jesus, Pilate and Herod have become friends. They weren't friends before this. Enmity, hostility between two Roman ruling authorities. I don't know how that works. Maybe they would fit in today's political climate that we have today here in this country. They were not friends before this. Pilate had sent him to Herod to get rid of Jesus, but put the burden on Herod. They weren't friends, just send him to Herod. That's his problem anyway. He's from his jurisdiction. Burnell?
You say something about Pilate and Herod. One come under the Roman government, and the other come under the Jewish government. That's what was the difference in the two, wasn't it?
Well, I think Pilate got the job as governor when Herod Archelaus was a cruel king.
Right.
And he kept the people stirred up. The king did. Too many uprisings. And so he brought that Herod back to Rome and made Pilate the ruler. But he wouldn't let him be the king. He let him be the governor. These kings descended from Herod the Great. They were Herod the Great's sons. Herod Archelaus, Herod Antipas, which is this Herod, and Philip Herod, or Herod Philip, the one he took his wife away from. Herod the Great's jurisdiction was divided among his sons, but one of the sons couldn't handle it. And so Pilate got his job, but he didn't get to be the king, he got to be the governor for some reason. So, at any rate, Pilate and Herod now, they're becoming friends now. Maybe Herod thought that Pilate was showing a courtesy to him because, this guy's from my jurisdiction, and Pilate knew that, and he's just as a courtesy to me, he's going to send me this guy because he belongs to me. I don't know. What did make them friends? Just to get to shove this guy back and forth between the two of them? Why had they fallen out? Look at Luke chapter 13. I don't know that this is the reason. Luke chapter 13, verse 1. Notice what's going to happen now in Jerusalem with Pilate. Luke chapter 13, verse 1. There were present at that season, whatever the season was, some that told Jesus of some Galileans. Galileans whose blood Pilate had mingled with their sacrifice. Two problems here in this verse 1 here. Apparently there were some Jewish Galileans there in Jerusalem for a season, for a feast of some kind. They were there to offer sacrifices at the temple. Jewish Galileans that belonged to Herod's jurisdiction. But they made their way to Jerusalem. They're there for this feast, for the sacrifice in the temple. Apparently something happened. These Jews were always, like we would be today, if we were occupied by China, we're always trying to undermine the Chinese to get rid of them. And that's what these folks are doing. They're always trying to undermine the Romans to get rid of them. And what happened this time, I don't know. There must have been something, a commotion that happened. Pilate heard about it. He sent some troops over there, and he apparently just told them, just kill them, get rid of them. Just kill the Galileans. And I was thinking, did it say it was 13? No, 18, so 18 was the Tower of Siloam fell on. But anyway, Pilate took it upon himself there, regardless if they were from Galilee or from Judea, he put an end to whatever was wrong. He had some Galileans killed. That might have insulted King Herod when Herod heard about it. He's over there killing my folks in Jerusalem. I don't know that that's what happened. I don't know. But this particular instance here with Jesus, he didn't have Jesus killed. He thought, well, he's from Herod's jurisdiction. I'll send him to Herod this time. He didn't do that with the Galileans that he killed there in Luke chapter 13. But notice what else Pilate did. When you get those Galileans killed, mop up some of their blood and mingle that with the blood of the animals that they're sacrificing there in the temple and call it a day. That was an insult to the Jews. You don't mingle human blood with animal sacrificial blood at any time. But Pilate, I guess he was on a tear. And he told them, like you get them killed, just use some of the blood, throw it in there with the animal sacrificial blood, and we'll just see how everybody feels about that. But was that the reason that there was division between Herod and Pilate? I don't know. But at least at this particular time, he did offer to send Jesus because Jesus belonged to his jurisdiction. Any comment? Y'all are awful quiet this morning. That's all right. But if I'm wrong now, you say something. Maybe Herod was insulted when all those Galileans were killed, and the Jews, of course, were horrified when all the blood was mixed together. But two Gentile rulers were united in their trial of this man Jesus. But now notice verse 13 before we run out of time. Notice this now. And Pilate's got Jesus back now for the second time. Jesus is back, and Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests and the rulers, and notice this, and the people. Pilate has called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people. Now, all this other had been done under the cover of darkness. The chief priests and the elders and the rulers of the people and the Roman soldiers had gone out to Gethsemane and under the cover of darkness and arrested Jesus. They've had this so-called trial of Jesus there with Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin council, and all that was done before daylight. The common people ain't up yet. They're not out on the street yet. They don't know what's going on. All this has been done under the cover of darkness or early in the morning. But now, think about this. When he got to Pilate the first time, it says it was early in the morning, John chapter 18. Early in the morning. Well, Pilate has talked to him. He sent him to Herod. Herod's talked to him. He sent him back to Pilate. It's getting up in the day. Is it 10, 11 o'clock in the morning now? I don't know. But time's a wasting. We got to get him crucified and buried before sundown tonight. And so he's back at Pilate's, but the people are out on the streets now. The people are out on the streets. And Herod, or rather Pilate, has called some of these people together. He's invited some people. The chief priests and the rulers were involved before, but not the common people. The common people weren't invited to any of this. Notice Mark chapter 15. Mark chapter 15. Come in, Ennis. Good to see you. Mark chapter 15. You didn't leave your better half at home, did you?
Senator Lafayette.
Senator Lafayette. Well, you Senator plumb out of the thing. Almost. Mark chapter 15. Mark chapter 15. Notice this here. Now, I think I mentioned this last week. Verse 6. We've got Jesus now before Pilate here. Mark 15, verse 6. Now at that feast, Pilate will release unto them one prisoner, whoever they desire, as a courtesy to the Jewish people. Pilate, the Roman authority, would release at this feast of unleavened bread, just release a prisoner. Whoever y'all want, we'll just release him, just a courtesy to the Jewish people, because he loved and respected them so much. Not really. But that was their custom. Notice verse 7, there was one named Barabbas. This is a Jewish prisoner. One named Barabbas, which was laid bound with them, that had made insurrection with him, who had committed murder in the insurrection. Here's Barabbas. He's in jail because he was part of an uprising, Jewish uprising against the Roman government there. And apparently maybe Barabbas had killed somebody, or been accused of killing somebody, but he's been thrown in prison. And he's in prison. It's the time of the year now that Pilate can release a prisoner. Just, whoever y'all want, just tell me, you can have him. Notice verse 8. The multitude now, and this is the people. The people that Pilate had called together back in Luke chapter 23, verse 13. The multitude of the people crying aloud began to desire Pilate to do as he had always done for them. Pilate, do what you've always done. Apparently, Jesus is standing there, And they're saying, well, he's there, just release him. Notice why I say that. Verse 9, but Pilate answered them, saying, okay, will ye that I release unto you the King of the Jews, Jesus? Notice verse 11. The chief priest moved the people. The people are hollering, give us Jesus. The chief priest worked the people, talked to the people, that he should rather release Barabbas. Don't release Jesus, rather let's ask for Barabbas. They're hollering, we'll just let Jesus go. But rather than doing that, let's ask for Barabbas, why don't we? The chief priests and the rulers are telling the common people that. No, not Jesus, but rather Barabbas. Let's ask for Barabbas, and of course we know the rest of that story. But Pilate apparently thought and knew that some people liked this man Jesus, and if he could get some of the common people there, he thought maybe they would ask for Jesus' release. Pilate had already found him not guilty. Herod had sent him back to Jesus. He found him not guilty. He's back in his hands again. If the people would show up and show some sympathy toward this man Jesus, it would be easier to let him go because that's what the people wanted. But that's not what the Jewish leaders wanted. Verse 22, notice verse 22 of Luke chapter 23. Pilate said unto them the third time, Why, what evil has he done? I found no cause of death in him. 3 times he's tried to let him go. And 3 times these people, and I said this was mob rule. Notice verse 5. Luke 23, verse 5. They were more fierce, saying, he's stirring up the people. Verse 10, the chief priests and the scribes stood and vehemently accused him. Verse 18, they cried out at once, saying, away with him. Verse 21, they cried, saying, crucify him. Verse 23, they were instant with loud voices. This was trial and sentencing by mob rule. Herod and Pilate found him not guilty, no fault to put this guy to death, but they weren't going to have it. Mob rule. And of course that still works today. There's a bunch of crazy folks together and you can do almost anything. Anyone have any comment?
Yeah, we talked about the word blasphemy, I believe last week, was it?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. We have examples where Christians can blaspheme against the Holy Spirit. If you go to Second Thessalonians, he is writing to these Thessalonians, says, beware of James and Alexander, because they have blasphemed the Holy Spirit.
Right.
So it's a possibility as you can be a Christian, but you can yet blaspheme against the Holy Spirit, because he said, deliver these 2 to Satan.
Right.
That they may learn more about Jesus, or about the blasphemy.
Right.
So if you think you can't blaspheme against the Holy Spirit, you're wrong.
Oh, yeah.
We have 2 examples where James and Alexander blasphemed against the Holy Spirit there.
To me, that was generally.
I had to bring that out last week, but I forgot it.
Yeah, that was generally attributing the attributes of God to the devil. That God didn't do that. The devil. That's the devil.
They were Christians in the Thessalonian church.
Yes. Yes.
As I understand the scripture there.
Yes. Yeah, we can still blaspheme against the Spirit of God today, yes. But let's say God didn't do that. That's all the work of the devil. That's all that amounts to. Thank you for your help this morning, your attention. I've enjoyed this class. We'll start next week, I think, with close my book, verse 12, I think, or 13, or 14. I think it's 14, ain't it? Verse 14 next week.